Support for Flying Valiant builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs on YouTube, where no diecast is safe. Video Geek Productions, all business, all geek. Brian Smith YouTube channel, clever schemes for fun and profit. A generous grant from the Jonathan Vonesh Foundation, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. All right, time for a Matchbox double feature. And this double is down to get dirty. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and we got a bit of a double feature for you today, courtesy of the Beefeaters Diecast Customizers. The Beefeaters are Diecast Salvage, Martin Dare's Dinky Restorations, Midlife Models, Matchbox Resurection, and Pimp My Diecast. I'll be giving links to all their channels in the description below. This group of fine UK gentlemen started out as a group challenging each other to builds, and then opened up their challenges, much like the Three Blind Mice did, to anyone who wished to participate, and I wished to participate. The first challenge that they offered was this construction build, and I had this forklift that I really wanted to customize into a shop forklift to be used in the background of my photo shoots in my garage, and I was all set to do this forklift when I had to buy another casting for another competition, and the seller was also offering this amazing mini dumper, this Matchbox Superfast from 1976, and I just fell in love with this silly little thing. I love that it's got bigger wheels in the front than it does in the back. I love that the dumper is on the front and that you control it from the back, and there was just so much to love about this. So I decided to do both, and did that knowing full well that I had two builds the week before. So as a glutton for punishment, I'm really in need of sleep. So we're going to get through this because it's the day before this is due, and I am going to get this one out on time. So let's do the breakdown. The Beefeaters were pretty loose with the rules. Basically, any construction diecast in more or less 1/64 scale would do. So I had my two castings. I knew that I wanted to replace the wheels on the dumper with something a little more realistic, and I wanted to create a shop forklift. And above all else, both of them needed to be really gnarly. With that in mind, punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. Doing a double build like this was complicated, so I'm going to try and separate this as best I can because I was working on both of them at the same time on the same day. The plastic fork had a lot of numbers and stuff on the bottom of it, so I had to file it off along with some casting lines on the support beams. Conveniently, when you take this one apart, it's only one rivet to take it apart. It also unsnaps, so if you're doing this one, check that out. It makes detailing a lot easier. I 3D printed off some pieces, including wheels for the dumper and some props for both vehicles, including this LPG tank that I was eager to add. I also printed off some fire extinguishers to make sure my vehicles were safe and ready for action. There was a lot of priming, so many pieces between the two of them. I went back to the Autoborn primer, and I'm really glad I did, because I think the big thing that I was doing wrong is I wasn't thinning it enough, and I was putting the primer in first instead of the thinner, and putting thinner in first really helped with dry needle problems. Oh, and I also turned the pressure up to 30 psi. That seemed to make a big difference as well, as far as getting the surfacer through before it started drying on the needle tip. Once the primer was dry, I gave everything a coat of black-brown because there was going to be a lot of nooks and crannies on these vehicles, so I wanted to make sure that when I did painting, you didn't see any of the white primer showing through. And that kind of added to the overall dinginess of everything because I did some thin coats of paint on both vehicles so that the black-brown would show through and they'd look more faded and dulled. I decided on yellow olive from Vallejo for the forklift because I wanted it to blend in a little bit. I wanted it to be noticeable in my photos, but I didn't want it to distract from whatever vehicles are being photographed in front of it. I did give it an orange fork though, just for fun, to give it some bit of contrast. I found this really nice 1/64 scale palette design on Thingiverse, and I enlarged it so that it would go between the forks, so it's basically like a gigantic palette in scale, but once it's on the forks it actually looks okay. And went over it with Vallejo airbrush wood. I also printed out these crates that I found on Thingiverse. I'll link to all these designs in the description below, and gave all the wood boxes a base coat. I hollowed out the design before I printed it so that it wasn't a solid block of resin. So the inside of the boxes were actually hollow, which meant that in order to have the resin not pool up inside of the design while it was being printed, I drilled a hole for the resin to drain out. So I patched that with some putty, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. The yellow olive was surprisingly darker than I thought it would be, and that probably was exacerbated by the black-brown paint underneath it. I used oily black to simulate the black vinyl that you'd find on industrial seats like this forklift. It has a nice matte, slight sheen to it that looks pretty similar to vinyl in that scale. I also dry brushed some various shades of black-brown over the wheels so they would look like hard rubber wheels that had been rolling over dirty concrete for years, and some dry brush silver accents to look like scrapes on the wheel hubs. Keeping with the dark theme, I used black and steel for the LPG tank, and I used grimy black for the joystick controls and tarnished black along the outsides of the fork rails. Once the putty was dry, I sanded it smooth and did some ATSF red for the crate. I also brought out some polyscale concrete to do some weathering on the pallet and change the shades of a few of the crates. And that just helps silver up the wood to make it look older and more weathered. And then I remembered I had this. This is the AK Interactive Old and Weathered Wood set. And even though I was on a time crunch, I was thinking to myself, now is the perfect time to bust this out since I have a bunch of wooden crates to paint and see what the different colors do. I started with the wood base on one of the crates, followed by the varnished wood color, then the weathered wood color, and I left one of the boxes with the original Vallejo wood and the other with the concrete colored paint. I then used some of the weathered wood on top of the palette, followed by some of the wood grain paint, and I used the fresh timber color to make it look like one of the slats on the palette had been replaced, and I used the fresh cut wood to simulate chips on some of the different crates and on the pallet edges. I then used the wood grain paint to simulate wood grain on some of the crates, and I decided since I'm feeling colorful, I would use Vallejo gray blue on the side of the palette to make it look like one of the heat-treated pallets that you'd see lying around. I did a gray coat on the boombox that I wanted to add to the forklift, so my forklift operator had something to entertain himself while he worked. And then I remembered I also had this wood weathering set, also from AK Interactive. It's got a light filter for wood, a filter for brown wood, and a wood wash. So I figured this would be a good one to try out. So I gave all of the crates a wood wash. It didn't do anything magical, but it was a nice dark brown wash to add some weathering to these crates, make them look like they had been stored in a humid area. And then it was time for my favorite new tool, the chipping color pencil from AK Interactive. I just love this pencil so much. If you're going to use any pencil from them, this is the one to get. I wanted there to be a contrast in finishes between the metal box and the wood boxes, so I gave it a coat of satin varnish and went over all of the boxes with Ultra Matte. Again, using the chipping pencil, I stippled on a lot of the chipping color onto the fork. I had a bit of the pencil lead break off, so I just dabbed off of it. And again, this, when used properly and used with a stippling brush, it creates a remarkable effect. It's such a good texture. The video and the photos really don't do it justice. I added some red to the fire extinguisher. I decided not to weather the fire extinguishers too much because they would probably not have been used. They would just be strapped on the side and be a little dusty. Added some detail elements to the boombox. Used the mirror paint to do the nozzle and the straps for the fire extinguisher, and a few bits on the control panel, and to give the boombox speakers a chrome outline and a chrome handle. I went with the MIG dirt wash for the wheels, and then went around the forklift with the chipping color and some light rust and some dark rust, and dry brushed on a little MSP silver to look like freshly scraped metal for the fork. Because again, I didn't want these to be abandoned vehicles. I wanted them to be well used and active, so they would have fresh scrapes on them. Went over various high use areas to make it look like the paint had been freshly worn off. I then used some engine grime from AK Interactive to simulate greasy spots on the forklift shafts and under the wheels. And I went over the LPG tank with Vallejo fuel stains. Not that it would have fuel stains on it, but it creates this nice amber wash, and did a fuel leak on the gas tank, even though it probably would not have any fuel in it because it would be running off the LPG tank. This is where I made a tactical error. I went over the entire vehicle in MIG's dust wash, which is a great wash, but then the dust got into the holes in the grate on the top and that didn't look realistic, so I went over that with the panel liner. Unfortunately, because both of those were oil paints, it reactivated the dust wash, so I ended up having to go back and fix this later. But I rolled with it and let the panel liner work its magic into the holes. I had used the mirror paint on the lights for the forklift and went over them with the amber and transparent red from testers. Then I reapplied more dust wash, fit the boombox. It was time to give it a decal, a number, and go on to the dump truck. Dump truck was pretty straightforward. It was a little bit of a pain to strip the paint off of it, so there was a lot of wire wheeling. I decided that I didn't like the horns on the top. They were not particularly realistic because this is a toy for children after all. I used the grinder to get it started and then used some coarse sandpaper to get it smooth. Took care of the casting lines, added some dents, and then set about finding a new horn. I printed out these wheels that I found on Thingiverse, used calipers to measure the new axles so they would fit right, marked spots for the new horns, and drilled a hole. I noticed there were 3 lines on the side of the dump truck for steps, and they weren't particularly realistic for steps, and because I was pressed for time, I decided not to cut out the steps, but instead cut off tiny pieces of styrene. I just made 3 tiny steps and put them in the indentations so it had a little bit more realistic steps to access the dumper. The way this casting worked was excellent because it had this small piece on the bottom to hold the wheels on and then a sub chassis. So I could actually assemble the axles, have them together, drop it in for a fitment, and then glue the axles to the wheels and not have to wait until putting the entire vehicle back together to do that. So I could have that out of the way, and that made painting the tires a whole lot easier. Again, safety first. Gave it a fire extinguisher, and there was no steering wheel on this, so I 3D printed a steering wheel to put on it, and then it was off to primer. You can see my new horns getting their primer. I decided because this was going to be a well-weathered dump truck, the bed didn't need to be separated from the actual truck, and again, a black-brown. This is more of a mahogany and black that I did. And then I used black on the horns because I was going to do chrome on them. I decided this truck needed a shiny set of chrome horns because the dump truck driver was very proud of his horns. And then mixed black and gray to get a good worn tire color, and shot the entire body with yellow ochre. Again, I kept the paint pretty thin on it because I wanted some of that brown to start showing through. Again, the mirror paint for the horns to make them nice and bright and chrome looking, and oily black for the seat, typhus corrosion on the wheels, and on the weird radiator-like fins that were on the side here. I used black and steel on the valve cover and on the brake lever, or whatever that is. I 3D printed a little toolbox for this guy and gave him ATSF red for the toolbox. And once the typhus corrosion was dry, some Ryza rust dry brushed over it, aka interactive engine grime over the silver paint, and again with the chip-in color pencil, and a lot of stippling. And this is an unnerving thing to do at such a large scale because it starts out as a huge mess, and then you stipple it off and stipple it off and stipple it off, and it starts looking a lot better. And then I kind of dry stippled on around the outside to hit the high points of the bed while leaving the inner areas that would be more shielded from contact more intact. Mirror paint again for the straps and the nozzle on the fire extinguisher. I did decide to do a little light rust on the bottom of the horns just to make it look like they've been on there for a little while, and then attach them with a little CA glue. For some reason, I can't find the footage of this, but I did use the MIG subtle dirt wash in between the treads of the tires and all over the body of the truck. This stuff is really fun. It's Wilder's Textured Earth, and this is the light brown, and it's very, very thick. It's pretty much like a icing, like a really gritty icing. And when it dries, it really looks like dirt deposits, which is perfect for a build like this where you want it to look like a well-used dump truck that would have residual bits of dirt clinging on in spots that wouldn't immediately empty from the dump truck. So I focused on the back fenders and the lower parts of the front of the dump truck where dirt would cling on. And while it is tricky to work with, it's pretty easy to master once you start playing with it, and cleans up with water, which is nice. And it's relatively easy to manipulate with your fingers until it's dry. I also went over the areas behind the wheels so it would look like dirt that had been kicked up and caked inside the wheel wells. Some spots on the entryway to the cab, I dabbed in between the squares on the outside of the bed and wiped off the excess, except for on the bottom, so it would look like dirt that had settled in the recesses of the bed. I noticed a few spots that I missed with the chipping tool, so I went back over them, gave the toolbox a bit of chipping as well, and then a nice shiny handle. I glued it in place next to the engine bay, added some soot to the exhaust area with a little pigment binder to hold everything in place, and it was time to do the decal, the build number, get all this together. All right, let's wrap this thing up. We got 2 vehicles, this nice clean mix of a new casting and a vintage casting, and let's see where they ended up. Yeah, I'm really happy with these, especially considering how quickly I had to work on them. Along with the footage that went missing was my making the glass for the dump truck. It originally didn't have any glass, but I made some out of leftover packaged plastic. It's just a simple matter of cutting it and using PVA glue to hold it in place. And I did that before I did all of the weathering. I knew that it would collect on the outer edges of the windows and give it a nice grimy finish for the windows. So there we have it. 2 well-worn workhorses still ready to do the job. Again, I love both of these castings and I am so happy with how they turned out. They're going to be great as background vehicles in my dioramas. This was a really fun challenge from the Beefeaters, and I thank them for allowing me and everybody else to participate. I can't wait to see what everybody else did. And also, I'm going to sleep for a while because these last 3 builds were all backed up against each other and I am very tired. And while I do love these vehicles, they are for sale if you're interested. You can buy any of the builds that you see in my videos or order a commission. You can leave a comment expressing interest in a casting. I'll let you know if it's still available. As you saw at the beginning of the video, I've got my Bandit level patrons that are presenting sponsors of the show. I would also like to thank Mid-Island Custom Diecast at the Rockford level. Thank you, Evan. Please check out his channel and subscribe to him. Also, my amazing wife, Carolyn, the best math tutor in all of Gainesville, Florida. Nay, the world itself. Also, my Douglas level patrons, the Drew Ranson Raves podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, and the Curtis Crafts YouTube channel. Please check out everybody's stuff in the description below. As I mentioned previously, there is now more Flying Valiant merch than ever before. You can buy stickers, masks, t-shirts, all sorts of fun stuff. I'm getting an order of stickers in this week. I'm very excited about that. You can check them out at JEPEG Design on TeePublic or click on the link in the description below to see what we got. As always, thanks to everyone who likes, comments, and subscribes. Which one do you like best? I'm eager to hear what people think of these 2 builds. As always, there's glamour shots at the end of the video, but if you want to see more images of the final product, you can check them out on Instagram at Flying Valiant or on the Flying Valiant Facebook page. All my art supplies are provided by my patrons, so if you like what I do and you've got the means and want to help me get more product to test out on these tiny cars or review, you can check out flyingvaliant.com and help support the madness over there. It's because of my amazing patrons that I can continue to do this and get more commissions and continue to build more fun cars for y'all to enjoy. It means so much to me that you drop by. I really appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who's subscribed, commented in the past. It really makes my day. If you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer in the comments. Once again, I would like to thank everyone for coming along with me for the ride. So, until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.